I'm Staff Sergeant McKibbins, 33, and I worked my way up through the military one hard-earned stripe at a time. For years, I stayed loyal to a family that dismissed my career, downplayed my sacrifices, and acted like I didn't measure up. But when I came home from deployment and they laughed at the store-bought rolls I brought to Thanksgiving, right before my commander showed up with a medal in hand, I stopped shrinking to fit their comfort. Ever been overlooked by people you kept showing up for? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. And before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever had to claim your worth out loud, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about standing tall. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. I grew up in a household where what people thought mattered more than who we actually were. We were the kind of family that looked polished in Christmas cards, matching outfits, practiced smiles, but what happened behind closed doors didn't match the image. My mom, Linda, was a part-time event planner and a full-time perfectionist. My dad, Carl, worked in mid-level management at a regional insurance company and measured success in titles and salary brackets. My older brother Matt was the golden child, varsity football, business degree, married by 24, house by 26. My younger sister Nicole followed the same script, minus the football. By the time she was 23, she had a fiancé, a dog, and a real estate license with mom's blessing. And then there was me. I enlisted in the Army right after high school. No one really saw it coming, not because I was some wild child, they just didn't think I'd veer off the plan. But I didn't want 4 more years of trying to force myself into a version of success that never fit. I wanted structure, challenge, a way to earn my own place. So at 18, while my peers filled out dorm applications and debated majors, I walked into a recruiter's office and signed my name. When I told my family over dinner, my mom didn't say anything at first. She just blinked, then reached for the wine bottle. "It's not a real career," she finally said. "It's just temporary, right? You'll do a few years, then go to college." My dad didn't look up from his plate. Matt made a joke about me becoming G.I. Jane. Nicole asked if I'd still get to wear makeup. I didn't expect applause, but the indifference stung. It was like I'd announced I was taking a year off to backpack through nowhere. Still, I smiled politely and nodded. Yeah, maybe just a few years. That first year was the hardest. Basic training stripped me down to nothing and built me back up, bone by bone. But in a strange way, I found something out there, something steady, something that didn't depend on how well I performed at Thanksgiving. My fellow soldiers didn't care if I wore mascara or brought the right wine to dinner. They cared if I had their back. And I did. When I came home on leave, I brought souvenirs, stories, photos. I showed up at Nicole's engagement party in uniform, straight from the airport. She thanked me quietly and introduced me as my sister. She's in the Army or something. I smiled through it. I always did. Every time I came home, I noticed how quickly I became background noise. At Christmas, Matt's new car got more attention than the fact I'd been deployed overseas for the last 6 months. At Easter, Nicole's wedding centerpiece trials dominated the table conversation while I sat quietly, sipping my water and listening. No one asked what I'd been up to. I didn't expect a parade, but I thought maybe someone would ask if I was sleeping okay. Or if I was scared sometimes. When I was stationed in Kuwait, Nicole asked if I could send her a photo in uniform. She wanted to include it in a family collage for her wedding slideshow. "Maybe something that shows your base, but not too gritty," she wrote. "It still has to look nice." I sent her a picture from the tarmac. No dust, no gear, just me with a tight smile in front of a hangar. She cropped out the background and used a sepia filter. It looked like a stock image. Even with all that, I tried to stay close. I called home when I could. I remembered birthdays. I ordered flowers for Mother's Day every year, even from deployment. When Nicole got divorced 2 years into her marriage, I sent her a care package with her favorite snacks, a weighted blanket, and a handwritten letter. She never responded. When Matt was laid off, I Venmo'd him $500 to help with rent, even though he never asked. He texted T-checks and didn't follow up. Still, I kept showing up. I thought maybe if I just stayed consistent, they'd see me for more than the odd one out. Maybe they'd finally realize I wasn't just tolerating the military, I was building a life through it. I was promoted to staff sergeant the same week Nicole posted a story about her new eyelash extension certification. My mom shared Nicole's post and wrote, "So proud of my girl, always chasing dreams." When I called to share my news, Mom said, "That's nice, honey. But when are you going to start thinking long term?" What she meant was, when are you going to become someone we understand? The funny thing is, the military was the most long-term commitment I'd ever made. I re-upped because I wanted to lead, to train new recruits, to be the kind of mentor I'd never had at home. I thrived in systems with clear expectations. You either did the work or you didn't. And if you did, you earned your spot. No one asked what college you went to or if your engagement photos turned out nice. But my family couldn't see any of that. To them, my life was a holding pattern. A delay. Something I'd eventually grow out of. They'd stopped asking real questions years ago. Our conversations became surface-level exchanges about weather, traffic, who was hosting the next birthday. And then there was Thanksgiving. I made it home that year with just enough time to drive from the airport to the house without changing. I brought store-bought rolls from a bakery near the base. I thought they'd like that, something warm, something simple. I walked into a room full of noise and smells and barely got a glance. Nicole was showing off her new watch. Matt was carving the turkey. My mom looked at the bag in my hand and raised her eyebrows. "Oh," she said, peeking inside. "Rolls." Then, to the room, "Maybe next year she'll contribute something real." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and placed the bag on the kitchen counter. My seat was in the corner, near the side door. No name card. No plate set. I fixed it myself. There's a kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. That's what I remember most about that day. The room full of clinking glasses, laughter, forks scraping plates. And me, sitting quietly in the corner, grateful just to be home, even if it didn't feel like mine. I watched them pass dishes, tell stories, laugh at old memories. None of them included me. I was a prop at the table, the soldier they kept around like a novelty, not a person. My mom leaned across the table to brag about Nicole's latest real estate award. Matt pulled out his phone to show pictures of his new backyard. No one asked about my last rotation. No one noticed the brace still on my wrist from a training injury. I told myself it was fine. That I didn't come home for recognition. That just being there was enough. I repeated that to myself like a prayer as I passed the cranberry sauce and smiled through another story about Nicole's dog's Halloween costume. Then someone opened the wine and everything started to blur. My uncle groaned as the doorbell rang. "Probably a delivery," he muttered. He stood up with a sigh, glass still in hand. I didn't think much of it until I heard the voice in the hallway. "Staff Sergeant McKibbins?" Every fork froze midair. I stood slowly. My commander stepped into the dining room, full dress uniform, holding a black velvet case. His boots echoed against the hardwood. My mom gasped. Nicole blinked like she was trying to place him. "She deserves to open this here," he said, looking directly at me. The room fell completely silent. After my second deployment, I came home for what was supposed to be a restful week with family. I'd been stationed overseas for 10 months and made it back just in time for Nicole's birthday dinner. My flight landed mid-afternoon. I drove straight from the airport with my duffel bag still in the trunk. When I stepped through the front door, the kitchen was already loud with the clatter of dishes and the smell of roasted vegetables. I was 15 minutes late. My mom glanced up from the table where everyone was already seated and said, "Oh, you made it." No one stood. No one paused to greet me. "You should have timed your flight better," my aunt added, not looking up from her wine glass. I stood there for a beat too long, unsure if I should set my own place or just wait for someone to notice. Eventually, I grabbed a chair from the corner and slid into the only open spot, wedged between my cousin Sarah and a folding card table extension they'd added to make room. My plate was empty. Everyone else had already been served. Matt passed me the salad bowl like an afterthought. "There's still some left." That was the first time I really saw it. Not just felt it, but saw it. I wasn't part of the family rhythm anymore. Whatever nostalgia I'd clung to from childhood, the idea that home would always mean belonging, had been chipped away, gradually replaced by a colder truth. I was welcome, but not wanted. Not really. The conversation that night moved in a closed circle. Nicole's birthday plans. Her new listing in the West End. My cousin Adam, fresh out of grad school, had just been hired as a junior associate at a regional bank. My uncle stood and raised his glass to Adam for landing a real job in this economy. "We're proud of you." Everyone clapped. Even me. I smiled politely and tapped my water glass against his, though I hadn't slept in nearly 36 hours and my neck was still stiff from the transport plane. My mom leaned over briefly and said, "We're glad you're safe, honey. You must be tired." Then she turned back to Nicole, asking if she was still going with gold or blush pink for the bridal party. At some point, someone asked what I'd been up to lately. I mentioned a training exercise that went sideways in the desert. Nothing graphic, just enough to hint at the complexity of what we'd managed to pull off. I thought it might land. That maybe they'd ask a follow-up. Instead, Nicole wrinkled her nose. "Let's not talk about war stuff during dinner, okay?" That ended the subject. They didn't mean it cruelly. That's what made it worse. It wasn't rejection fueled by malice, it was erasure born of discomfort. They didn't want to imagine what my job actually entailed. They wanted the version of me who brought a bottle of wine, wore a nice sweater, and stayed quiet about anything that didn't fit the image. The next day, I offered to help clean the garage. My dad had mentioned it needed organizing, and I had the time. He shrugged and said Matt was already handling it, maybe I could just relax for once. So I stayed inside, folding laundry in the guest room while Nicole and Mom tried on bridesmaid dresses in the living room, laughing about strapless disasters and debating heel height. They didn't ask if I wanted to join. I didn't expect them to. Later that afternoon, I overheard Mom on the phone with a friend. "No, she's not back permanently. Just visiting. Still in the army." "Yeah, it's not forever." I keep telling her to think about a real future. That word again. Real. I began to notice the patterns after that. The careful phrasing. The polite indifference. At Matt's barbecue that summer, one of his friends asked me what I did. Before I could answer, Matt jumped in. "She's in the military, kinda like security, but international. She's always traveling. Crazy schedule." I laughed along with him, but that wasn't my job. My role involved strategic operations coordination. I led a team. I wrote briefings. I made decisions that affected real lives. But to them, it was just noise. Just army stuff. Nicole told me once, half laughing, that she never knew how to explain what I did to her coworkers. "I usually just say you're doing something brave somewhere hot. It keeps it simple." And maybe that was the problem. My whole life had been reduced to a single, sanitized sentence. Something brave. Somewhere hot. Nothing concrete. Nothing uncomfortable. Nothing that demanded understanding. When my friend Jordan, another soldier I'd trained with, was killed by an IED, I flew home for the memorial. It overlapped with a family brunch. I skipped it, obviously. When I mentioned why in the group chat, no one responded. The next day, Nicole posted a picture from the brunch with the caption, "Family, food, and laughter, nothing better." There was no malice. Just obliviousness. They didn't ask how I was doing. No one said his name. I started pulling back, little by little. Calling less. Visiting only when necessary. I began to dread the holidays. Not because I didn't love them, because I did. Or at least, I used to. But every return trip started to feel like visiting a museum where I used to live. All the pictures were there, but none of them were me. The last time I tried to explain how I felt, it was over coffee with my mom. I'd just gotten back from an extended field exercise. We sat at a cafe near her house. She asked if I was tired. I nodded. Then I said, "Sometimes it feels like you all see me as a visitor. Not really part of the family anymore." She looked surprised. "That's not true. We love you. We're just not used to your world. It's intense." I waited for her to ask more. To invite me in. She didn't. Instead, she stirred her tea and said, "Nicole's thinking about getting her broker license. Isn't that exciting?" It was always like that. A shallow dive, quickly pulled back. At Nicole's bridal shower, I brought a gift she didn't register for. A personalized compass engraved with the words, "Wherever you go, go with all your heart." It was something we used to say to each other when we were kids, back when we'd play explorer in the backyard. She opened it and smiled politely. "Oh, this is unique. Thank you." Later, I overheard her telling a friend, "I wish she'd just get something off the registry. I don't need more metaphors." I left early that day. From then on, I stopped trying to fit into the frame they built around what counted as success, as love, as being one of them. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. Not then. But I was tired. Tired of trying to be relatable in a room that didn't want to understand me. Tired of lowering the volume on my life so theirs could stay comfortable. They never said it out loud. But the message was everywhere, in small dismissals and sidelong glances, in what they celebrated and what they ignored. I didn't belong in their version of family success. I didn't wear heels, host wine nights, or talk about mortgage rates. I wore combat boots and carried stories they didn't want to hear. Still, I kept showing up. I thought, maybe if I just stayed quiet long enough, one of them would notice the effort. That one of them would look at me and say, "We're proud of you. Not just for what you do, but for who you are." But that day never came. At least, not from them. The flight home was rough. Delayed, then rerouted, then delayed again. I hadn't slept in 36 hours and was still wearing the same uniform I'd left base in. My boots were dusty. My wrist was sore from a minor sprain I hadn't bothered getting checked. But I made it. Thanksgiving was the one holiday I'd always tried to make. Birthdays came and went. I missed Nicole's wedding. I sent gifts for Father's Day and skipped most 4th of July cookouts. But Thanksgiving? I made the effort. No matter where I was stationed, I found a way to get home, even if it was just for a few hours. This time, I just completed a training rotation that pushed my limits in every direction. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't safe. It was the kind of work that doesn't show up in family photo albums. But it mattered. When I walked in the door, no one looked up. Nicole was in the kitchen arranging cheese cubes on a wooden tray shaped like a leaf. Matt was scrolling on his phone at the table. My mom was taking something out of the oven. The house smelled like cinnamon and turkey, like every other Thanksgiving before, but there was no acknowledgement that I'd just come back from the other side of the world. I stood in the doorway for a moment, holding a paper bag with a dozen fresh rolls I'd grabbed from a bakery near the airport. Still warm. Not homemade, but not frozen either. It was the best I could do. "Hi," I said, setting the bag on the counter. "I brought rolls." My mom glanced inside the bag and let out a small laugh, the kind that stings more than it should. "Store-bought again," she said, not to me but to the room. "Maybe next year you'll contribute something real." My Uncle Darren, who'd arrived early and was already 2 glasses of wine in, chuckled. "I mean, you've had enough years to get it together." The words hit harder than they should have. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was everything that came before. But in that moment, I felt the distance between us become something solid. Tangible. Like a wall I hadn't noticed was being built brick by brick. I didn't say anything. Just nodded, pulled a chair from the dining room, and sat down near the edge of the kitchen. No one moved to help unpack my bag. No one asked how the flight was. I folded my hands in my lap and told myself to be grateful. To not make this a thing. Nicole walked by with a tray and said, "Can you move your boots? You're getting dirt on the floor." I slid my feet back under the chair. Dinner was served 20 minutes later. My place setting wasn't set. I made one for myself. Forks didn't match, but I didn't care. The table was loud with conversation, football, wedding planning for one of my cousins, property values, interest rates. I recognized none of it. No one asked about my deployment. No one mentioned I'd been gone for most of the year. At some point, my aunt started talking about her neighbor's son, who had just passed the bar exam. Everyone clapped. "That boy really turned himself around," she said. "Remember when he used to get suspended all the time?" "Shows what a little structure can do," Matt added. "Some people just need to stop drifting and get serious." I didn't say anything. I cut my turkey into tiny pieces and focused on not clenching my jaw. Later, when dessert was brought out, my cousin Adam pulled out his phone to show everyone a video of his office surprise party for his promotion. He worked at a local bank. Nothing flashy, but apparently the cake was themed and there were party hats. We toasted with sparkling cider and everything, he said proudly. My uncle raised his glass. To Adam. For doing it right. Everyone drank. I didn't. Then Nicole, already 2 drinks in, looked over at me and said, "You're still doing army stuff, right?" I nodded. Is that even sustainable? Like, don't you get tired of always being gone? I do get tired, I said carefully. But it's my job. She blinked, then turned back to the table. I'd be exhausted. I need my sleep. My dad finally looked up from his plate. So, what exactly are you doing now? Still moving boxes or whatever? It wasn't a question. It was a reminder. Years ago, during a temporary posting, I'd mentioned helping manage logistics for incoming supply loads. Somehow that became the family shorthand for everything I did. Moving boxes. As if I worked in the back room of a grocery store. I looked at him and said, actually, I was overseeing training for Allied Unit Coordination and Crisis Response. I've been running a joint readiness program with 3 other countries. He raised his eyebrows like I'd just said I was building rockets. Huh, he muttered, then turned back to his green beans. The silence that followed was worse than mockery. It was complete dismissal. By the time we moved to the living room, I was done speaking. I sat quietly, watching them laugh at old family videos that I wasn't in. Nicole paused one clip and said, "Look how cute I was. Remember that trip to Cape Cod?" I didn't remember. I wasn't there. I was in basic training. I looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. The one friend who usually checked in during holidays was on a rotation herself. I thought about stepping outside, but it had started to snow, and my coat was still in the car. I stayed planted in the armchair by the window, nursing a glass of water and trying not to look at the clock. I reminded myself that this was temporary, that I had a flight out in 3 days, that I could survive this the way I'd survived other things. But then, as the night wound down and people started loosening belts and unbuckling shoes, my uncle brought up the high school's Veterans Day assembly. They had a Marine come speak this year. Great guy. Real hero. Got shot in the leg, still walks with a limp. You could just tell, he'd seen stuff. It was moving. That's nice, my mom said. We should have more of that. So many people don't appreciate what service means. Then she looked at me like she'd remembered something vaguely relevant. Didn't you say you did something with a base in Texas last year? I blinked. That was 3 years ago. She nodded absently. Well, still counts, right? Everyone nodded along. Still counts. That night, I sat awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling. There were Christmas lights strung up around the window, blinking softly in red and green. The bedspread was a floral print I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure the last time I'd actually been assigned this room. It used to be mine. Or at least, it had a long time ago. Before it became the extra space. Before I became the extra person. My duffel sat in the corner, half unpacked. I looked over at the uniform I'd worn home, folded neatly on the chair. My name was still stitched across the chest. My rank was visible, clear as day. And yet, sitting in that house, surrounded by people who knew everything about each other and nothing about me, I had never felt more invisible. They didn't see me. Not really. Not who I'd become. Not what I'd given up. Not the things I carried every time I walked through that door pretending I wasn't disappointed. They saw the girl who brought store-bought rolls. Who hadn't settled down. Who hadn't conformed. And that was the night it finally sank in. They were never going to get it. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't want to. And that betrayal, quiet, consistent, and wearing the face of family, cut deeper than anything else I'd faced in uniform. I lay awake in the guest room for hours that night, the cheap ceiling fan clicking softly with every rotation. The sheets smelled like lavender, probably from whatever detergent my mom used, and the mattress had that stiffness only spare beds do, the kind that remind you you're not staying long. I tried to close my eyes, but every time I did, that laugh echoed in my head. Maybe next year you'll contribute something real. I kept replaying it over and over. The tone. The way the whole room just moved on like it wasn't a big deal. My uncle's snort. My dad's silence. Nicole's smirk when I quietly slid the bag of rolls into the corner like it had embarrassed everyone. It wasn't about the rolls. It never was. I thought about everything I'd done that year alone. The days I spent running drills in full gear under a sun so hot it made the air ripple. The nights I slept in a cot next to a generator, writing letters by headlamp to the family who never wrote back. The months I spent watching over newer recruits, keeping them from making mistakes they wouldn't come back from. And then I thought about the people I'd lost. About Sergeant Cruz, who had a daughter just starting kindergarten. About King, who never made it to his third deployment. About how every time I'd sat through another funeral in a pressed uniform, I'd wondered if anyone at home could begin to understand the weight we all carried, even in silence. But none of that counted here. Not in this house. Not if you didn't bring wine and show up in a cardigan and talk about mortgage rates. Not if you didn't stay long enough to be part of the group photos, or bring something homemade, or pretend that everything was fine just to keep the peace. I sat up around 4 a.m., still in my jeans, hair still tied back from the flight. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call anyone. I had a friend back on base who would have answered, no matter what time it was. But I didn't want someone who'd just agree with me. I wanted someone who'd understand. So I called my commander. It rang 3 times. Then his voice came on, groggy, but alert in that way military people learn to be, even when half asleep. McKibbins. I'm sorry. I know it's early. He exhaled. You all right? And that's when I started talking. I didn't plan it. I didn't even realize how much I had to say until it all came pouring out. I told him about the roles. About the dinner. About how they made me feel like a stranger with bad manners who didn't belong. I don't remember everything I said. Just that my voice cracked more than once and that I kept apologizing for sounding dramatic. I remember one sentence clearly, though. I said, "It's like nothing I do matters unless it comes with a casserole dish and a good photo angle." There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "They don't get to define your worth." You hear me? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. But maybe, he said, after a moment, maybe it's time they see it. I laughed once dryly. Yeah, well, seeing it hasn't worked so far. Then make it unmistakable. He didn't offer advice about forgiveness. He didn't tell me to be patient or to have a thicker skin. He didn't minimize it or try to reframe it as a miscommunication. He just sat with me in that space, the one where disappointment turns into something more bitter, something harder to name. He didn't flinch from it. Before we hung up, he asked when I'd be home again. I told him Christmas was probably out, but I'd likely be around for Easter. Then I hesitated and said, "But they really show up for Thanksgiving." He made a sound like acknowledgement. All right then. We'll talk soon. That was it. No promises. No plan. Just a quiet understanding left hanging between us like a closed file. The next day, I got up late and skipped breakfast. The house was mostly empty. Nicole had gone to the gym. My dad was at the hardware store. My mom was outside in the yard adjusting one of the decorations on the porch. I walked past her without saying much and took the car for a drive. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move. I ended up at a small overlook on the edge of town. We used to go there as kids before it was redeveloped into a scenic pull-off. I parked and stared at the trees, still half covered in brittle fall leaves. The wind was sharp and smelled faintly like wood smoke from somewhere nearby. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I started listing things. Not in any particular order. Just things. Places I'd been. Ranks I'd earned. People I'd helped. Lives I'd watched change. Missions I'd finished. Moments I'd nearly broken and didn't. By the time I stopped typing, it was a scrollable list. None of it had ever been mentioned at dinner. I stayed there until my phone battery dipped into the red, then drove back and ate leftover stuffing from the fridge while standing at the kitchen counter. No one asked where I'd been. That night, Nicole showed me a new video her friend had taken at Friendsgiving. Everyone was in sweaters. Someone had brought a homemade pie that collapsed in the middle. They laughed and toasted and posed. "See," she said, scrolling. "Real holidays. Not like ours." I nodded. "Yeah, real nice." She didn't catch the sarcasm. She rarely did. That weekend, before I left, my mom offered me a container of turkey. It was in a mismatched Tupperware with a cracked lid. She handed it over like a peace offering and said, "Next time, Maybe you'll have time to cook something? I forced a smile. Maybe. She didn't hug me. I didn't offer. On the drive back to the base, I kept replaying that phone call. The stillness in his voice. The suggestion I hadn't seen coming. Maybe it's time they see it. I didn't know what that meant yet. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I wasn't planning anything. But when I got back and unpacked, I sent a quick message to confirm the date of the next Thanksgiving. Just a group chat reply when Nicole sent out the save the date text. Nothing dramatic. I included the time, the address. That was it. I didn't expect anything to come of it. But somehow a seed had been planted. Something unspoken. And part of me, tired, used to being overlooked, but still not quite defeated, wondered what it might mean if someone else said the things I never could. Not to defend me, but just to hold up a mirror. The rest of the year passed the way service years always do, fast and structured and heavy with responsibility. I threw myself into the work. Harder than usual. I picked up extra rotations. I stayed late when I didn't have to. I said yes to things I used to think weren't my problem. I didn't think about home much. I didn't call often. And when I did, I kept it light. Surface level. Short. But in the back of my mind, I held on to that phone call. That suggestion. That maybe, just maybe, someone outside of all of this might show up, not to fight my battles, but to quietly remind the people at that table who they'd been eating beside all these years. Someone who wouldn't flinch from the silence. Someone who might change the conversation without ever raising their voice. But even then, I didn't expect him to actually come. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were quiet. Busier than usual, but quiet. I kept my head down at work, said yes to extra shifts, stayed late when I didn't need to. I ran drills like they were personal. I volunteered for a weekend logistics review that nobody wanted to touch. Staying busy made it easier not to think too much. Nicole sent a group message mid-November with details for dinner. Same house, same time, same expected dress code, business casual but festive. I stared at it for a few minutes before typing back, "I'll be there." Then I turned off my phone and went back to work. I debated canceling. More than once. It wasn't that I didn't know what to expect. I knew exactly what would happen. The same jokes. The same dismissals. The same seat in the corner and the polite clapping for someone else's minor life updates. I wasn't interested in being a prop again. But something about what my commander had said that night stayed with me. They don't get to define your worth. But maybe it's time they see it. So I packed the same duffel bag, wore the same boots, and stopped at the same bakery on my way. The rolls were still warm when I got there. I walked through the front door just before 4 o'clock, exactly on time. No one noticed. Nicole was in the kitchen pouring sangria into a glass dispenser shaped like a pumpkin. My mom was slicing the turkey. Matt and my uncle were watching the game from the living room. My dad waved absently from behind a half-read newspaper and didn't look up. I set the bag of rolls down on the kitchen counter. No one offered to help. No one asked how the drive was. My mom looked over and smiled the way you do when a neighbor you don't really like shows up uninvited. "Rolls again," she said. "At least they're fresh this time." I didn't answer. I just nodded once and found a seat near the edge of the room, same spot as the year before, folding chair near the coat rack, out of the way, but not out of sight. Nicole passed me once and asked if I could help bring out the side dishes. I followed her to the kitchen without a word. I carried a tray of green beans and a stack of salad plates. I didn't speak unless spoken to. Dinner started like a checklist. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce. Clinking forks, mid-level conversation. Nicole's friend had just gotten engaged. My cousin had a new job. The table buzzed with passive applause. No one asked me anything. I ate quietly. The rolls weren't even opened. Still in the bag, folded over in the corner of the counter like they were part of a joke nobody wanted to tell out loud. My dad made a comment about how tired the country was getting, all these people making noise online about things they don't understand. My uncle nodded along, adding something about kids these days. I sipped my water and looked down at my plate. The game came back on just as dessert was being served. My mom passed around store-bought pumpkin pie and a tub of whipped cream. I declined. No one noticed. Then the doorbell rang. It was abrupt, One loud chime that cut through the noise in the kitchen. My uncle groaned from the couch, not looking up. "Probably a delivery," he said, adjusting his waistband. I knew better. I stood up quietly and walked toward the front door just as my uncle opened it. And there he was. Full dress uniform. Pressed, polished, composed. My commander stood in the doorway like the house belonged to him. His cap was tucked under one arm, the other holding a black velvet case about the size of a shoebox. The front porch light made the metal pinned to his jacket shimmer slightly. My uncle blinked and took half a step back. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Staff Sergeant McKibbins." I stepped forward. "I'm here." He looked at me and nodded once. "You deserve to open this here." Behind him, I could see my neighbor's holiday lights blinking from across the street. The silence inside the house was immediate and complete. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. The sound of his boots on the tile echoed through the hall as he followed me to the living room. Nicole was frozen with a glass of wine in her hand. My mom stood halfway between the kitchen and the couch, her mouth slightly open. My dad had lowered his newspaper but not yet folded it. No one spoke. My commander stopped in the center of the room and turned toward me. "For your leadership during this year's multinational training initiative," he said, his voice clear and steady, "and for exceptional performance under pressure, above and beyond the call of duty, you've been awarded the Joint Service Commendation Medal." He opened the case and held it out to me. Inside was the medal, gleaming centered. Underneath it, a certificate with my full name in bold lettering and 3 official signatures. He didn't rush. He didn't explain himself further. He didn't downplay it. He simply said, "You earned this." I wanted to present it in the presence of people who matter to you. I didn't reach for it at first. I was still watching everyone's faces. My mom looked confused. My dad was now fully sitting up, his paper dropped to the floor. Nicole's hand was shaking just enough to make the wine ripple in her glass. I stepped forward and took the box, careful not to tremble. I looked at him and nodded once. "Thank you, sir." He returned the nod. "I'll see you back on base." And just like that, he turned and walked out. The silence stayed behind like a fog. No one moved for a long time. Finally, my mom spoke. "I didn't know you were getting an award." I closed the box gently and placed it on the side table near the window. No one asked. Nicole sat down slowly, still staring at the medal like it might vanish if she blinked. My uncle tried to break the tension with a joke. "Well, that was unexpected." I looked at him without smiling. "Only if you haven't been paying attention." My dad cleared his throat. "So this was official?" I nodded. "Very." There wasn't much left to say. The rest of the evening moved in slow motion. No one mentioned the medal again. The game stayed on, volume turned down. People began to gather coats and pie tins. Nicole helped with the dishes without saying anything else. When I left that night, I didn't say goodbye. I carried the medal case under one arm and the unopened bag of rolls under the other. On the way to my car, I paused at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house. Nothing about it had changed. But something had shifted. Not just in them, but in me. I hadn't come to prove anything. Not really. I came so I could stop waiting for them to see me. And when they finally did, it wasn't because I asked for it. It was because someone else, someone who knew, had stepped in and said, "Look." I didn't open the medal case until the house was quiet again. After my commander left, the room had stayed frozen for what felt like a full minute. My uncle shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Nicole picked up her wine glass and set it back down without drinking. My dad straightened his shirt collar and pretended to be focused on the halftime recap. No one said anything about what just happened. Eventually, people started moving. Slowly. My mom disappeared into the kitchen. My brother stood up and walked to the bathroom without a word. Conversation resumed in small, disjointed pieces. Weather. Traffic. Someone's flight home tomorrow. But not a single person asked what the medal was for. Not a single person said, "Tell us more." So I sat in the corner, same chair as last year, and opened the case myself. The medal caught the light as I tilted it slightly. Beneath it, the commendation paper bore my name in bold print, followed by a paragraph detailing what I had done over the past year, language most of them wouldn't understand and, honestly, wouldn't try to. But I understood every word. I knew what it meant. It meant that in a high-risk joint operation across 2 countries, I had taken command of a deteriorating situation and prevented it from becoming a casualty count. It meant my decisions under pressure, my hours of training, my instinct had saved lives. It meant I had stepped into the kind of leadership role most people never see, never imagine, and never acknowledge, especially not at family dinners where casseroles get more attention than medals. My hands shook a little when I closed the case again. Not from nerves. Just from the weight of finally being seen, even if only briefly, and not by them. My mom reappeared from the kitchen, eyes a little red. She didn't say anything directly to me. Just set another pie down on the table and offered slices to whoever was still lingering. Nicole declined. My dad muttered a quiet "sure" and took a piece. When she turned toward me, she paused like she wanted to say something, then thought better of it. I didn't push it. I didn't want an apology that was half-performed. I didn't need it to be pretty. I just wanted them to sit with the discomfort they'd never allowed themselves to feel. Matt came back and took his seat again. He didn't look at me. Didn't look at the case either. He just poured himself more wine and asked Nicole about her client who was buying the lake house. The conversation felt like a performance they were all trying to finish before the curtain dropped. I stayed until the end. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it through. When I stood to leave, the room didn't pause this time. No one stood with me. My mom asked if I wanted to take leftovers. I said no. My dad gave me a one-armed hug that barely made contact. Nicole called out bye from the other room like I was a house guest she didn't know that well. I walked out with the medal in my bag and the rolls still untouched. The drive back was quiet. No music. Just the hum of the tires and the sound of rain starting to hit the windshield in slow, heavy drops. I replayed the moment over and over, him walking in, the way the air shifted, the way no one could look directly at me afterward. I didn't feel proud in the way I thought I would. I felt clear. It wasn't about the medal. It was never about that. It was about them finally sitting in the discomfort of what they'd chosen not to see. Back on base, the days resumed their rhythm. PT in the morning. Briefings, training sessions, unit rotations. No one brought up Thanksgiving, and I didn't offer the story. I kept the medal case in my locker, not hidden, but not on display. It was a reminder. Not of what I'd earned, but of what I'd carried alone. A week later, I got a text from Nicole. That was something. I didn't know what to say. I stared at the screen for a while, then replied, "You didn't have to say anything." That was the problem. She didn't answer. My mom emailed me the next day with a forwarded link to a recipe for savory artisan rolls and a note that said, "Maybe we could make these together next year." I didn't respond to that either. But something had shifted. A few days later, one of my sergeants stopped me in the hallway and said he'd heard from command that I'd been formally recognized. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's about damn time." I smiled. Thanks. That meant more than any store-bought pie or clumsy compliment ever could. By mid-December, word had spread through our unit. A few of the younger recruits asked what I had done to earn the commendation. I told them the truth, but I didn't inflate it. Just gave them the facts and reminded them that leadership isn't about medals, it's about decisions. And consequences. And being willing to carry both. One night, I got called in to speak with a newer platoon member who was struggling with adjustment. He was 19, fresh out of basic, and quiet to the point of concern. I listened as he told me about feeling out of place at home. How his parents thought the army was just something he was doing to avoid community college. How none of his friends came to his graduation. How he thought maybe he'd made a mistake. I looked at him and said, "Sometimes the people closest to you aren't capable of seeing what you're doing. That doesn't make it any less real." He nodded, tears at the corners of his eyes he wouldn't let fall. "You show up anyway," I told him. "Not for them. For you." I don't know if it changed anything for him, but he stood a little straighter the next morning at roll call. In the weeks that followed, I stopped waiting for messages from home. I sent my niece a birthday card, answered a few family group texts, and left it at that. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. Just done trying to shrink my life to fit into a story they were comfortable telling. My story wasn't built for their comfort. It was built from long deployments, missed holidays, early mornings, and hard choices. It was written in sand and sweat and silence. And if they didn't know how to read it, that was no longer my burden to carry. Around New Year's, I got a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded note and a frame. The note read, "For your wall, if you ever decide you want to hang it up, Jay." It was my commendation, reprinted on thick cardstock and matted professionally. The frame was plain but solid. I set it on my desk for a few days before finally mounting it on the wall above my bookshelf. Not because I needed the recognition, but because it belonged to me. Every once in a while, I still think about that moment in the dining room. The way the room stopped breathing when my commander walked in. The way the metal gleamed under the chandelier. The way my mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wineglass. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even vindication. It was something simpler. It was truth made visible. Finally. And that was enough. Later that night, after most of the guests had trickled out and the last of the dishes had been scraped into Tupperware, I found myself in the kitchen rinsing off a plate that wasn't mine. Habit, I guess. The hum of the dishwasher masked the sound of footsteps behind me, but I still knew who it was before she spoke. My mom stood there, arms folded, eyes softer than they'd been all evening. She didn't rush into words, and I didn't offer any either. We stayed like that for a few seconds, her watching me finishing the plate, until she finally said something. We just didn't know. I didn't turn around right away. I placed the plate carefully in the drying rack, wiped my hands on a dish towel, then looked at her. It wasn't about knowing, I said. It was about respecting what you don't. She flinched just a little. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I also wasn't going to do the emotional labor for her. I mean, I guess I always knew you were doing something important, she added, her voice tentative. But I didn't realize it was all that. That's kind of the point, I said. You didn't ask. She nodded slowly. That's fair. She didn't cry. And she didn't beg. It wasn't some dramatic Hallmark apology. It was just two people standing in a kitchen too late at night, trying to figure out how to bridge a gap that had been growing for years. I don't want us to be like this, she said. Then don't make me shrink to stay in the room. That landed. She leaned back against the counter, looked at the ceiling like maybe the words were written up there. I'm not asking you to understand everything I do, I continued. But I need you to stop acting like it's less than what everyone else brings to the table. She looked at me then. Really looked. Like she'd only just realized I'd grown up. I'm sorry, she said. Not for the roles. Not for last year. For all of it. I didn't say I forgive you. I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't, not yet. I just nodded and turned the faucet off. That was enough for that night. The next time we spoke, it was a few weeks later. She called me out of the blue on a Tuesday evening. No pretense. Just a quiet, hey, I was thinking about you. She didn't ask about the weather or my laundry. She asked where I was stationed. What I'd been working on. If I'd met anyone worth keeping around. It felt a little clunky, but it was honest. I gave her real answers. My dad took a bit longer. He was always quieter, more measured. The kind of man who lets the room speak first. But about a month after Thanksgiving, I got a text from him. What's your actual job title now? I replied, Operations Sergeant, Joint Readiness Division. He didn't text back, but when I came home that spring, I noticed he'd printed out a news article I'd been quoted in. He'd circled my name. It was pinned to the corkboard in the garage, half covered by old receipts and a calendar that hadn't been updated since August. Small things. Nicole never brought up the medal again. But at Easter, she asked if I'd want to come talk to her friend's high school class, civics, or something like that. I hesitated at first. It felt performative. Like she was trying to make up for something without actually saying she was sorry. But then I thought about it. I wasn't doing it for her. I said yes. The kids were nervous, polite, half interested. But one girl in the front row asked me if being in the military made me feel invisible around civilians. I paused, then nodded. Sometimes, I said. But then you realize that being seen isn't the same as being understood. And the second one matters more. She wrote that down. After the talk, Nicole clapped for me in the back of the room. She didn't say much, just handed me a coffee afterward and asked if I wanted to ride with her back to the house. I said sure. We talked about our childhood on that drive. About how we used to make up games in the backyard and hide under the porch when it rained. She said, "You were always the brave one." I looked at her. "You never said that before." She shrugged. "Maybe I should have." The thing about rebuilding is that it never looks like a grand gesture. It looks like slow mornings and quiet questions. It looks like not being interrupted when you speak, or being asked to explain something without the expectation that it'll be dumbed down. It looks like space being made, real space, not performative space. I still didn't go home every holiday. I didn't force myself to show up out of guilt or obligation. But when I did, things felt a little different. One night that summer, I sat on the back porch with my dad while he grilled. He didn't say much until he handed me a beer and pointed toward the metal case I'd left on the kitchen table earlier. "You ever gonna hang that thing up?" he asked. I smiled. "Maybe." He nodded. "You should." That was it. But it meant more than any toast or group text ever had. I no longer needed to be understood by them to understand myself. But the difference now was, they were trying. And I wasn't going to punish them for being late to the table, as long as they stayed in their seats and listened. The last time I visited, my mom asked if I could help her fix the Wi-Fi. While I was typing in the password, she said, "You know, I've been reading more about what you do." I looked at her. "Yeah," she nodded. "I didn't realize how many women serve in roles like yours. It's incredible." There was a pause. Then she added, "You're incredible." It didn't feel like flattery. It felt earned. I didn't deflect it. I just said, "Thanks." And that was enough. The wounds hadn't vanished. But they were healing. Not through apologies, but through effort. Not through performance, but presence. I stopped walking into rooms worried I was taking up too much space. I stopped folding my accomplishments into bite-sized pieces they could digest. I let them sit with the fullness of who I was, and I watched them adjust. They still have moments. They still slip. But now, when they do, I name it. And they listen. That's the difference. That's what rebuilding looks like. Not forgiveness on command, not reconciliation for show. Just two sides deciding to meet in the middle and build something new, brick by careful brick. No casseroles required. These days, Thanksgiving doesn't creep up on me with the same kind of weight it used to. I still get the texts, the group chats, the head counts. Nicole still sends out the planning spreadsheet, who's bringing what, who's flying and when. Some things never change. But I do. I no longer run down a mental checklist wondering what version of myself I need to be that year. I don't rehearse polite small talk or think through backup answers for awkward questions. I don't shrink my voice to match the volume of the room. And I definitely don't ask for permission to belong. I show up how I show up. I wear what I want. Sometimes it's jeans and boots. Sometimes it's my dress uniform, depending on whether I'm coming straight from base. I don't explain anymore. If they ask, I answer. If they don't, that's fine too. I still bring rolls. The same kind. Same bag. Same store. But now I carry them in with both hands like they're something sacred. I set them down in the center of the table and make eye contact with whoever's watching. And whether they say anything or not, they see it. I'm not apologizing. I never should have been in the first place. The metal isn't always part of the story anymore. It lives in a glass case now, mounted on the wall just inside my apartment door, right above the light switch. I don't stare at it every day, but sometimes, when I'm locking up before a deployment or coming home from a long rotation, I glance at it and feel something settle in my chest. It's not pride exactly. It's not vindication either. It's peace. I know who I am, even when nobody's clapping. Some family members still don't get it. That's fine. My uncle barely speaks to me now unless football's on. One of my aunts still introduces me at parties as the military one, like I'm a novelty act. My cousin's husband once asked me at dinner if I ever saw real action, like I'd been on a movie set. I used to correct people gently. Now, I just let the silence do the work. Because the truth is, my story isn't a prop. And I'm not here to educate people who only want to understand me on their terms. What I do, what I've lived, isn't for show. It's for me. My commander said something to me once, years after that Thanksgiving. We were at a promotion ceremony for one of my juniors. I was in the back, off to the side, clapping with the others. He came up, shook my hand, and said quietly, "You ever notice the ones who do the real work never need the spotlight?" I said, "Yeah. I've also noticed they're the ones who keep everything from falling apart." He smiled. Exactly. It stuck with me. Recognition matters. It does. But only when it comes from the right places. From the people who've seen you in the dark. The ones who know what it costs to stand upright when everything's pulling you down. Who understand that showing up, over and over, even when you're overlooked, that's its own kind of legacy. I don't need my mom's approval anymore. Or my dad's awkward attempts at small talk. I don't wait for Nicole to tell me I'm impressive, or for my extended family to ask real questions about what I do. If they do, great. If not, I'm still whole. That's the difference now. It's not that I don't care. It's that I stopped needing them to care in order to believe in myself. I've built something bigger than their recognition. A career. A reputation. A record. A name that carries weight in rooms they'll never step into. I've trained people who now train others. I've led teams in high-stakes environments, made decisions that saved lives, and stood between chaos and order more times than I can count. I used to wonder why none of that translated in family settings. Why medals didn't hold as much power as marriage announcements or homemade desserts. Why my years of service were still being weighed against casseroles and promotions in office parks. Now I understand. People only see what they're willing to look at. And if they need you to be small so they can stay comfortable, they'll keep their eyes shut and call it balance. But you don't have to stand in that darkness with them. You get to step out. And I did. Now, I measure Thanksgiving by different markers. Not by who compliments my outfit or whether someone comments on the rolls. But by how I feel walking in and how I feel walking out. Am I smaller? Quieter? Numb? If the answer is no, then I'm doing just fine. Last year, my niece, she's 10 now, asked if I would come to her school for Veterans Day. She wanted to show her class someone real, who'd been in the military. I said yes before she finished the sentence. When I showed up, she ran up to me in the hallway, grabbed my hand, and said, "You're the coolest person I know." That moment? That was everything. It reminded me that the impact I make doesn't have to come with applause. Sometimes, it's just being seen, really seen, by someone who's still learning what courage looks like. And I get to be that image for her. That's the legacy that matters to me now. Not the family dinner dynamics. Not the approval I used to beg for in subtle ways. But the knowing, deep and steady, that I have nothing left to prove. So yes, I still go home sometimes. I still sit at the same table. I still pass the cranberry sauce and ask about jobs and neighbors and the same recycled stories. But now, I sit with my shoulders back. And when the moment comes, when the rolls are served, I lean in just a little, smile, and say, I brought those. Not as a peace offering. Not as a placeholder. As a reminder that I don't need a homemade dish to justify my place. I earned it long ago. And now, I bring my whole self to the table, store-bought rolls and all. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have already seen it? Or walked into a room knowing you didn't need anyone's approval anymore? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if this story hit close to home, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries, owning your story, and showing up on your terms.